My parents disowned me in 10th grade when I was pregnant. 20 years later, they're suing my son. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never thought my life would turn into something like this. Honestly, I didn't even know it could happen to me. I was just a normal girl. Well, maybe not perfect, but normal enough. My name's Alec Rose, and when I was 16, I thought I had my whole life in front of me. I thought I had time. I thought my parents would always be there. I thought we were a family, but they proved me wrong in the cruelest way. It started quietly, almost unnoticed. I was just going through my last year of high school, trying to get through each day without too much trouble. I was known as the girl who smiled too much, who laughed too easily. I had friends who cared, dreams I clung to, and the kind of teenage hope that makes you feel untouchable. I didn't know life could pull the rug out from under you in one day. The day I found out I was pregnant, everything shifted. At first, I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking it was a mistake, a bad dream. But every test confirmed it. I was terrified. Not just of what it meant for me, but of what it meant for the people I loved. I didn't know how to tell them. My parents, my mom and dad, were the first people I thought of. But I didn't know that telling them would be the moment everything broke. When I told them, I thought there would be anger, sure. But I didn't expect complete silence. The way their eyes looked away. The way they stopped talking to me, as if I'd become a stranger overnight. There were no hugs, no reassurances. Just a coldness I couldn't explain. That night, I lay awake in my bed, listening to the sound of my parents whispering in the kitchen, voices low and sharp. I didn't want to hear them, but somehow I did. They were saying words I'll never forget. They said I was a disappointment, that I had ruined everything, that I was no longer part of their lives. They disowned me, just like that, like I was nothing more than a mistake. And at 16, with nowhere to turn, I suddenly became someone without a home, without family. I became someone who had to fight for survival before I even understood what survival meant. For a long time, I didn't know how to explain it to myself. I moved between friends' couches, taking odd jobs that barely kept food on the table. I stopped going to school because the shame was too heavy to bear. I became invisible to the world I once knew. But I refused to let my son grow up in that shadow. I promised myself, no matter how hard it got, I would keep going. For him. When he was born, everything changed. I remember holding him for the first time. He was so small, so fragile, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like hospital linen. I remember looking at his face and feeling something I can't put into words. It was love, yes, but deeper. It was a vow. I would never let anyone take him away from me. I worked every day and every night. No matter how exhausted I was, I kept going. I cleaned houses, worked in restaurants, anything that could keep us alive. There were days when I cried in the dark, when I wanted to give up. But then I would look at him sleeping beside me, and I would push myself harder. I had lost everything, but I refused to lose him too. Years passed, and I started to believe maybe we had left the worst behind. I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I found a small apartment, a steady job, and a rhythm that felt safe. I thought my parents had disappeared forever, that the wound they left behind would slowly fade. I was wrong. One ordinary afternoon, a letter arrived. My heart skipped when I saw the envelope. Formal, heavy, written in a way that made my stomach turn. It was legal paper. My parents, they were suing me. They claimed custody of my son, the boy I had carried in my body, fought for, stayed awake nights worrying over. The boy I had loved more than life itself. I couldn't breathe. I read their words over and over, unable to believe what I was seeing. They said they wanted to protect him, that I was unfit. But I knew what this really was. This wasn't about my ability to care for him. It was about control, about punishment for the choices I made 20 years ago. I sat on my couch staring at that letter for hours, my chest tightening with every breath. Everything I had worked for, every sleepless night, every drop of strength I had poured into our life, was now being challenged. And I realized in that moment, it wasn't just a custody battle. It was a war. They had abandoned me when I needed them most. And now, after 2 decades, they were coming back to take away everything I had fought for. The question burned in my mind. Why now? What had changed? I knew one thing. I couldn't let this go without a fight. For me, for my son, for every scar that I had carried silently for years. And so, the war began. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the words of that letter like a cruel echo. Custody, unfit, protection. They sounded so cold on paper. I sat with my son in my arms, rocking him gently, feeling his steady breathing against my chest. My heart ached, not just for him, but for the truth that had been stolen from us. How could they come after him now, after all these years? The next morning, I found myself standing in front of a lawyer's office, the letter clutched in my shaking hands. I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been in a courtroom before. I'd never imagined I'd have to fight like this. Not for myself, but for my own child. But as I walked in, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about winning. This was about surviving. This was about proving to them and to myself that my life and my love for my son mattered. The days that followed became a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and late nights. Every moment felt heavy with a tension I could almost touch. Friends tried to comfort me, but how could anyone understand? They didn't know what it was like to be thrown away by your own parents. They didn't know what it felt like to have your entire existence challenged because of a choice you made as a scared teenager. As the case moved forward, I learned more about what they were saying against me. They painted a picture of me as reckless, unstable, incapable of raising my son. I remember feeling my chest tighten every time I heard those words. It felt like they were trying to rewrite my entire life into something shameful, something unworthy. But my reality was different. My reality was a room filled with laughter, scraped knees patched with kisses, late-night homework sessions, and quiet moments of love that no paper could ever describe. Every hearing brought new challenges. Their lawyer was sharp, precise, ready to pick apart every piece of my life. Every missed rent payment, every night I worked late, they twisted into evidence against me. They tried to make it sound like my sacrifices were failures, but I held on to my truth. I had built a life from nothing. I had given my son a home filled with love, and I wasn't going to let them erase that. The tension became almost unbearable. Every call from my lawyer made my stomach knot tighter. Every night I lay awake, wondering what would happen if I lost. Would I lose my son forever? Would everything I had fought for collapse in front of me? I couldn't imagine that. I refused to imagine it. But the fear didn't leave me. It clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Then came the hearing where they called their witnesses. I remember sitting in the back of the courtroom, my hands gripping my coat so tightly I could feel my knuckles turn white. My parents walked in with an air of certainty, like they already owned the victory. The judge's eyes scanned the papers on the desk. My heart raced as they spoke. Their words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they carried the weight of betrayal. Didn't speak that day. I listened. And in my silence, I promised myself that I would find my voice. I wouldn't let their version of the story stand. I had to tell my own. I had to show the world what they refused to see, the years I had given, the love I had fought for, the sacrifices no one ever noticed. Between hearings, I worked harder than ever. Every extra shift, every sacrifice was a statement to myself and to them. I was telling them, I am here, I am enough, I am a mother who would fight through hell to protect her child. But the weight of it all was crushing. I began to wonder if I had the strength to see this through. I thought about walking away, about letting them take him just to end the pain. But every time I looked at his sleeping face, I knew I couldn't. He didn't choose this battle. He didn't ask to be part of this war. But he deserved for me to fight. And so I did. Each day felt like walking through a storm. The courtroom became a battlefield where every word, every look, every piece of evidence mattered. And while they fought with cold precision, I fought with something they could never touch. My truth. The tension built until it became unbearable. I could feel it in my bones, the moment where everything would change. And I knew that the next hearing would not just be another day in court. It would be the turning point. The moment where the war I had fought for years would reach its climax. I had no idea if I would win, but I knew I had to stand. For my son, for my life, for the truth that no one else seemed willing to see. And that's how it came to be. The day I stepped into that courtroom, knowing it would change everything. The day of the biggest hearing came like a storm I couldn't escape. I woke up that morning with a weight pressing on my chest, heavier than I'd ever felt before. My hands trembled as I dressed, my son sleeping peacefully beside me, unaware of the storm about to hit our lives. I kissed his forehead softly, promising him, without saying it aloud, that I would fight for him until my last breath. Into the courthouse, I felt the air shift. It wasn't just another hearing. It was the moment everything would change. My parents were already there, sitting with their lawyer, their faces cold and unreadable. I saw in their eyes not concern for me, but something else. A conviction. A belief that they were entitled to take what they wanted. The courtroom felt suffocating. The murmurs of strangers and the echo of footsteps filled the space as I took my seat. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. When the hearing began, the air grew heavier. Witness after witness stepped forward to paint the picture my parents wanted. My life reduced to mistakes, my motherhood questioned, my every choice dissected. I sat silently, letting their words wash over me like an icy wave. Every accusation felt like a blade slicing through my soul. They said I wasn't stable, that I couldn't provide for my son, that I had ruined his life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout, "This isn't the truth." But I knew that would not help me here. I had to be strategic. I had to let them speak while I gathered my strength. Every false claim they made only fueled something inside me, a fire I didn't know I had. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my knees trembling but my voice steady. I told my story, not in cold, legal words, but with everything I had. I spoke about that day in 10th grade, about how terrified I was, about how they told me I was nothing, and walked away. I told them about every night I worked late, every hardship I endured, every sacrifice I made for my son. I told them about love. The kind of love that keeps you going when the world tells you to stop. The room fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward, listening. But then my parents' lawyer stepped in, cutting through my words with sharp rebuttals. The tension spiked. My chest felt tight, like I was drowning in a... Here I couldn't breathe. I could hear my parents whispering, their voices low and certain, and I felt the cold reality, the moment where everything hung in the balance. The hearing stretched on. Hours passed like seconds. Every word, every glance, every motion felt like a piece in a puzzle that could shatter at any moment. I fought to hold myself together, but the emotional strain was unbearable. I thought about walking away, about giving them what they wanted just to end the pain. But I couldn't. I couldn't imagine a life without my son. Then came the judge's silence, the pause that felt like eternity. My heart stopped. My throat tightened. I knew that silence meant something. They were deciding. Everything depended on those next few moments. I gripped the edge of my seat, my knuckles white, my breath shallow. And then the words came. I didn't hear them clearly at first, only the trembling of my own voice in my mind, wondering if this was the end or the beginning. The room seemed to collapse in on itself. My hands shook. My knees felt weak. My whole life had led to this moment. I looked at my son in the back row, sitting quietly beside my lawyer. His eyes searched mine, and I saw trust, love, and hope reflected in them. In that instant, I knew whatever happened, I had given him something no one could take away. My fight, my voice, my truth. The hearing ended in a blur. I stepped out of the courtroom with my legs like jelly, but inside I was burning with a mix of fear, relief, and determination. The fight was not over, not yet, but something had shifted. That day marked the point where I realized this wasn't just about custody. It was about justice, about truth, about showing the world that no matter what you've been told, your voice matters. As we walked out into the cold air, I kept my son close. I whispered to him softly, "We're going to be okay." But deep down, I still didn't know. I only knew this. I would keep fighting, no matter what came next. The days after the hearing felt unreal. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The judge, G's words, the way my parents looked, the way my son clung to me as we left the courthouse. It was as if time had slowed, but the weight in my chest never eased. Every night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had done enough, wondering if the fight was truly over. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Life returned to a fragile rhythm. I went to work, cared for my son, tried to breathe again. But the court's decision lingered like a shadow, pulling at me every time I smiled or relaxed. My parents didn't stop either. They started a legal appeal. Their words came like knives through phone calls and letters, accusing me of lies, irresponsibility, and neglect. They painted me as a bad mother, someone unfit to care for my child. I remember sitting on the couch late one night, my son asleep in my arms, and crying like I hadn't in years. The exhaustion, the pain, the injustice, it all hit me at once. But in those tears, there was something else. Determination. I couldn't let this break me. I couldn't let them take away my son. I thought about everything I'd endured, every moment since that day in 10th grade when my life spiraled into chaos. Every night I stayed up wondering how I would protect him, every sacrifice I'd made. And I realized this was not just about me anymore. This was about him. My son deserved my fight. The following months were a blur of court dates, lawyer meetings, and emotional exhaustion. But amidst it all, I found strength I never knew I had. I learned to speak louder, not just in court, but for myself. I told my story over and over again, each time with more conviction. I told friends, strangers, anyone who would listen, because I knew the truth was my weapon. And then came the day of the final decision. Walking back into that courthouse felt different this time. My steps were heavy, but my heart was steady. I knew this day would decide everything, whether my son stayed with me or was torn away forever. When the judge's words finally came, I felt a storm inside me. Relief, disbelief, pain, and triumph all tangled together. The ruling was in my favor. My parents' appeal was denied. My son would stay with me. I sat there, stunned, tears streaming down my face, my hand clutching his. We had won. Not just a legal battle, but something far deeper. As we walked out together, I felt the air around me shift. It was quieter somehow, yet heavier with meaning. My son held my hand tightly, and I knew I had protected him. But I also knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was proof that even in the face of betrayal, rejection, and injustice, you could still fight back. That day changed me forever. It taught me that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's fighting despite it. That love isn't just a feeling, it's action. That injustice can be fought if you refuse to stay silent. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know this. I will never stop telling our story. Because it's not just mine, it's the story of every person who's been told they don't matter. And my question now is this: how many more voices need to rise before the world finally hears? The days after the final hearing were quiet, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had happened. I kept thinking about how much had changed, how much I had changed. Standing in that courtroom, facing my parents and their cold certainty, I had discovered something inside myself I never knew existed. A strength I had buried for years, a voice I had almost lost. The first morning after the decision, I woke before my son. The house was still dark, the air cool and heavy with the scent of the night. I sat on the edge of my bed, my mind replaying everything: the betrayal, the court battles, the tears, the fear. I thought about how I had been 14 when they had turned their backs on me, how I had carried that pain silently for years. And now, here I was, standing with my son beside me, knowing I had fought, not just for custody, but for dignity. When he woke, he smiled up at me without knowing the storm we had just weathered. That smile was my anchor, my reminder of why I had to keep going. I held him close and whispered promises, promises I meant with every fiber of my being, that no matter what happened, I would protect him, that nothing could take him away from me. But the truth was, my parents' fight wasn't just about custody. It was about control, about proving they could dictate my life even after I'd grown, even after I'd built a life they didn't believe I deserved. Their rejection had been my deepest wound, and their lawsuit was a cruel reminder that some wounds never fully heal. Yet, standing there, I realized something important. I had healed enough to fight and to win. The struggle left scars, but it also left lessons. I learned that injustice doesn't always wear a badge or a uniform. Sometimes, it comes dressed as family, hidden behind words and traditions. I learned that silence is the easiest thing to fall into, but the hardest thing to live with. And I learned that a voice, even one that's been silenced for years, can rise again with power enough to change everything. Now, when I look at my son, I see not just my child, but the proof of my fight. I see hope. I see resilience. And I see the reminder that the hardest battles we fight are often not for ourselves, but for the ones we love most. So I keep telling our story, not just for me, not just for him, but for everyone who's been told they don't matter. For every young girl who feels abandoned, every mother who feels unheard, and every person who has been forced to fight for their right to exist. Because this story isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to all of us. And I have to ask, how many more voices must rise before the world truly listens? I don't know the answer, but I know this. My voice will not be quiet. Not now, not ever.